Good evening and welcome to Behind Headlines, and in this program tonight we shall be discussing the evil and barbaric murder of a young Jewish couple, both employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. They were shot and murdered in cold blood outside of the Jewish Museum in America's capital, and we'll be asking, is there a direct correlation between incitement and hatred of Israel and the Jewish people that we're seeing on our mainstream media and social media? And Tim, it's great to have you joining us on Behind Headlines tonight, because you are a reverend and you're also the director of Christian Action against anti-Semitism. So great to see you on the program. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, as always. So let's run through some of the events that occurred last week. So on the night of Wednesday, the 21st of May, in the nation's capital, in the United States, in Washington D.C., a young, beautiful Jewish couple who were set to get engaged in Jerusalem this week were brutally murdered outside of the Jewish Museum in Washington D.C. The couple were later identified as Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim. Both of them were employees at the Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. This tragic murder sent shockwaves throughout Israel and the Jewish communities worldwide, particularly in the United States, and also with the Messianic Jewish community in Israel. The perpetrator, Rodriguez, who is 30, is reported by the Telegraph to be a Black Lives Matters protester and supporter, and based on his social media posts, has developed an obsession with Hamas and a desire for violence. So what we saw really was a left-wing terrorist attack on Israel and the Jewish people. In his video address, we see that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, directly blamed our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, together with the French President Macron and the new Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, for being on the wrong side of history for not condemning Hamas and wanting to place sanctions against Israel for their latest military operation to destroy the terror organization. And also be talking about the correlation between incitement and hatred to violence against Jewish people on our streets. Share with us your thoughts on what is a horrific murder of two Israeli diplomats in America's capital, Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it is. Like you said, it is horrific. It was shocking. I think so many of us were so broken-hearted. They seemed like such a beautiful young couple. They were planning to be married soon. You know, they were getting engaged, and also for the Christian community, for the Messianic community, it's deeply painful. A lot of people have context, have links with Yaron, particularly, I think. But again, you mentioned there that Netanyahu talked about the leaders in the West, particularly Starmer, Macron and Carney in Canada. This was on the back of a claim where 14,000 babies were in danger of starvation in 48 hours, which was quickly debunked. But this led to an increase online of so much pressure and hate, so many people just spouting anti-Semitism. And it's actually in no way, sadly, and this is deeply sad to say, it was almost no surprise that on the back of this and off that atmosphere, if you like, of anti-Semitism, we have a murder in cold blood of a lovely Jewish couple.
Absolutely, and I've also seen with the kind of mainstream media coverage on this one from our mainstream news channels talking about this horrific murder that took place in Washington, D.C. And then straight after that report, followed by what's happening in Gaza with injured children and blaming Israel for it. So on the one hand, we're saying we have to make sure that we protect Jewish people from Jew hatred, and this is a direct result. And then you get a news item followed directly after it that's essentially blaming Israel and saying, well, obviously what happened there was essentially justified. And that is the impression that a viewer gets. So, of course, our mainstream media is also complicit in this as well. And don't ever blame who's really responsible for what's happening in Gaza, which is Hamas. I'm going to start off with a very important Bible verse, and this is taken from Isaiah chapter 59, verse 7, that says the following: "Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity, wasting and destruction, are in their paths. Share with us your thoughts and your reflection on Isaiah chapter 59, verse 17.
Yeah, absolutely. The path of the wicked, of the unrighteous, is violence, and particularly with the innocent. You see a lot of this kind of language. Jesus, himself, he said the devil is a liar and a murderer from the beginning. This idea of celebrating, for example, the murder of innocents, targeting innocents. We saw this straight after October the 7th, people celebrating, mocking the Jewish people. You see them glorifying and lifting up the murder of their babies, of their elderly. That is evil. That is darkness. I mean, it doesn't take, somebody with massive discernment to see that is pure wickedness, and the paths, their iniquity, it leads to destruction. You see actually on the back of what's happened, it leads to their destruction often, because if you touch God's people, you touch the apple of his eye. But interestingly, Hamas in the Hebrew means violence,
Absolutely. So we got clearly the scripture to point that once you have that poisonous heart, and then out of it, violence is forthcoming, and that wanting to shed innocent blood, and that's what we saw last week in Washington D.C. I mean, for personal reflections on what happened, I know the Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. I had a fantastic meeting when I was doing an internship for memory in Washington D.C. and met this brilliant Israeli diplomat who went on to become Israel's ambassador to the UK. He's also then became director of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Ron Prosser, and I remember meeting him at the American Enterprise Institute, and they had Ronald Reagan's ambassador to the UN talking about Israel. And I saw him afterwards, and I recognized him because he was at my university, the University of Manchester, giving his talk on the peace process in '95, and I just felt a prompting of the Holy Spirit to just go and speak to him. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he just says, "What's a young guy like you doing here in Washington D.C. from Manchester?" And then he said to me, "Look, here's my card. Let's have a meeting." So he set up a meeting for me in his office in the Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. in January of 2001, and literally spent about 2 hours talking to me, which was amazing. And that was very special, and I learned a lot from that. And then afterwards, about 2006, also spoke in the Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. as well. So for me, it has personal memories. Living and working in D.C., I know it well. So this is difficult, this story. It's very difficult. But also, this beautiful young Jewish couple that were literally days away from getting engaged in Jerusalem just had their lives just cut down short by this murderous Rodriguez, who had that spirit of Jew hatred, is quite frightening.
Absolutely. And, hearing your own experience there in Washington, I can only imagine, you have links there. But this actually, we should be surprised, we should be shocked, but this incident, this hate, we talked about this Bible verse, this violence, this evil where you can shoot an innocent couple, and the way he did it, actually, I hear he bent over and make sure that she was completely finished off, even when she was crawling away. I mean, that's a level of evil that you can't even comprehend.
He shot them in the backs, so he shot them with their backs turned to them, so they didn't even see their terrorist attacker. He just did it in such cold blood, no mercy whatsoever, and then obviously finished the job off, which is horrific. So our hearts and our prayers go out to the family and also to their friends as well, who are absolutely devastated because they were preparing for a Jewish wedding in Israel and getting married, and then their lives just cut so short. Was horrific. And it also reminds me of a friend I had who was murdered in Jerusalem in 2002. Her name was Janice Ruth Coulter, and she was part of the Hebrew University program that went on in 1996. She went on to become a leader in taking Jewish Americans out to Israel through the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And in a canteen at the Hebrew University, there was a terrorist who planted a bomb, and her and new Jewish Americans who are getting ready to study at the Rothenburg International School of International Relations were just murdered in cold blood. And I got to find that story first by sitting on the tube, opening up the Sun newspaper that was left in the carriage, and it mentioned her name. Wow. And what happened. So I know when terrorism strikes, it's horrendous.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many people know someone that's been affected by it or has family members. I mean, Israel is a nation of about 10 million people. The Jewish people worldwide, I think 15, 16 million. So everybody's connected somehow to someone that suffered, and yourself that's been advocating so marvelously actually for so many years. You've got your connections, and you feel the pain and the trauma, and it's something so common in Israel. All this terrorism, this hate, and this increasing hate from even world leaders, and yet they're so. We did our last program. We talked about this idea of they have this mourning, but they also are able to have the joy, and I think that's kind of like God is their strength. I take comfort in the scriptures that says He's their shield. They'll never be uprooted despite what the world leaders say, and He's with His people.
Absolutely, and we know something beautiful will come out of this. It always does, particularly when His people are martyred because of their faith, and also Jewish. Also, let's have a look now at this excellent CBN news report. This one's entitled "Staff Members of the Israeli Embassy Killed for Gaza in Shooting Near the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C."
A visibly shaken witness recounted the moment he saw the shooter murder the young couple at close range.
I was walking by, and a guy came up and looked like a gun. I couldn't tell what it was, but I heard it afterwards, the shots, and he shot this young couple.
The victims, Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim, were planning to get engaged.
The young man purchased a ring this week with the intention of proposing to his girlfriend next week in Jerusalem. They were a beautiful couple who came to enjoy an evening in Washington's Cultural Center.
The two had just left an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum when the suspect approached them.
Prior to the shooting, the suspect was observed pacing back and forth outside of the museum. He approached a group of 4 people, produced a handgun, and opened fire, striking both of our decedents.
And he ran inside and yelled something. I couldn't make it out what he said. He just ran up. It was terrible.
Police say the suspect, 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez, ran inside the museum where he was arrested by security.
The suspect chanted, "Free, free Palestine," while in custody.
One witness says she gave the suspect water just before his arrest, unaware of the crime he had just committed.
We offered him water and he was like, "Yeah, that'll be great, actually." That's when he reaches into his backpack and pulls out a keffiyeh and says, "I did it. I did this for Gaza."
The Times of Israel says the suspect was reportedly a member of a radical left-wing group that advocated on behalf of Palestinians. President Trump condemned the attack on social media, saying these horrible D.C. killings, based obviously on anti-Semitism, must end now. Hatred and radicalism have no place in the USA. Condolences to the families of the victims.
I spoke to the President of the United States multiple times tonight on behalf of the President. His prayers are with all of us, all of the Jewish community, everyone in Washington, D.C.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement saying, "We are witness to the terrible cost of the anti-Semitism and wild incitement against the state of Israel. Blood libels against Israel have a cost in blood and must be fought to the utmost."
So powerful, it's actually so emotional to see the first-hand, the witnesses, their response. You could see them choking up. You can only imagine how painful and traumatic it would be to witness something like that in a Jewish museum. It's
no, it's beyond horrific, absolutely. And let's make no bones about this. This was a left-wing inspired terrorist attack. And this is the danger of incitement of Israel and the Jewish people, that this is what happens when you become indoctrinated with this hatred. So this wasn't an Islamist attack. This was a left hard wing, an attack on Israel. To say there are no left-wing terrorists, I think, proves the obvious. There clearly are, because we saw it in that anti-Semitic terrorist attack on that beautiful young Jewish couple.
Absolutely, and we've been warning for a long time, you know, this marriage, if you like, between this far-left Marxism and, you know, Islamism, and also you have the far right who also blame the Jewish people for everything, and it's a horrible, horrible atmosphere right now.
Yeah, so on Thursday, the 22nd of May, the Times of Israel reported under this headline, instead of walking down the aisle, we are walking with you to your graves. I mean, that is a very, very powerful, but also shocking headline from the Times of Israel. So they went on to say that Yaron and his bride-to-be Sarah were named as victims of the Washington D.C. shooting. Both victims were embassy employees who were about to get engaged. The couple worked and advocated for Israeli-Arab coexistence. Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim were named on Thursday morning as victims of Wednesday night's shooting at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. Lischinsky and Milgrim were both employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington, and according to the Israeli ambassador, US Letha, the two were about to get engaged, and how Yaron had purchased a ring this week with the intent and the purpose of getting engaged in Jerusalem. Tal Naim Cohen, a spokesperson on behalf of the embassy, said the two were shot at close range whilst attending a Jewish event at the museum.
Tal Naim Cohen, she actually said, Yaron and Sarah, words cannot begin to describe the heartbreak and sorrow. In fact, just this morning we were laughing and talking by the coffee corner, and now all that remains is a picture. And then she later wrote in the post what you mentioned, in that instead of walking them down the aisle, they're walking them to the graves. And actually, I read that this morning, and I choked up. I mean, it's incredible, one minute you can be having coffee with someone in the corner, and the next something horrendous like that happens.
And their only crime was being Jewish. That's what's so shocking and outrageous. We have now a report to go to, and this is produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, really warning about the dangers of incitement and hatred, because we know that all Israeli diplomats, whether stationed in the UK or Washington D.C. or around the world, are under threat only because they are representing the nation of Israel at a governmental level. Take a look.
This didn't start last night. For months, Israelis and Jews have been demonized, threatened, hunted, online, on campus, in the streets. Last night, Yaron and Sarah, staff members of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., just days from getting engaged, were murdered outside the Jewish Museum in the U.S. Capitol. Their killer screamed a slogan now used as a license to kill: Free Palestine. This isn't protest, it's hate, and it's spreading. Hate speech turned into murder. Speak up, or let it happen again. Because never again means nothing if we stay silent.
Thank you to the Israeli Foreign Ministry for that video report. And it is so important, actually, that we speak out, that we stand up against anti-Semitism. Interestingly, you put the scripture today of Isaiah 59, Simon. Actually, that was in my Bible reading plan this morning, Isaiah 59 to 62. And in there it talks about giving yourself no rest until Jerusalem is established among the nations, as watchmen, as people who love Israel and want to comfort and bring peace to Israel. We can't give ourselves rest at this time. We need to stand up against anti-Semitism at this hugely important time. Now, Sarah Milgrim, she worked in public diplomacy department at the embassy. She held a master's degree in international studies from the American University and an additional master's degree in natural resources and sustainable development from the United Nations University of Peace. And she said, "My passion lies at the intersection of peace building, religious engagement and environmental work. And actually, I heard a lot of people mention that she was trying to bring the Palestinians together with her Israeli people to bring peace. And you know, you see this on October the 7th when they murdered those people who were actually working for peace and working for the livelihood of the Gazans. It's
Absolutely, and this seems to be the way with anti-Semitic terrorist attacks like this one. It's those that advocate peace the most are the ones that are murdered in cold blood, as you mentioned with the victims of October the 7th. It also goes on to say that she says, whilst working with Tech to Peace in Tel Aviv, Israel, she conducted comprehensive research on peace building theory, emphasizing grassroots initiatives in the Israeli-Palestinian region. She says, my diverse experiences, including facilitating insightful discussions on geopolitics in Israel and Palestine as a Jewish educator, and researching on an array of environmental topics in India and Central America, reflect my commitment to fostering an understanding between different people. We see that Milgrim grew up in Kansas City, in the suburbs, and when she was a teenager, a white supremacist shot and killed 3 people at a Jewish institution in that city. In her senior year of high school, she was active in responding after swastikas were painted on her high school. She says, I worry about going to my synagogue, and now I have to worry about safety at my school, and that shouldn't be a thing, she told a local TV news station. So even back then in her childhood, she was dealing with Jew hatred. She was already speaking to the media. She was already kind of leading that fight against Jew hatred. And no doubt that murder of Jewish people in Kansas had a big and a deep impression and lasting impact on her.
Absolutely, and what a lot of us don't realise, especially as Christians, to be Jewish in the West, you know, in London you see this, to meet at the synagogue or to go to school, even primary schools, it requires so much security. A part of our efforts to connect with the Jewish community near us, at one point we were driving their children to their school in Stamford Hill, and you wouldn't believe the amount of security they have to have, full-time security guards, like gates you have to go through, because people want to target Jewish children, and this is something Sarah Milgrim knew growing up, and it's something that's so sad, and it's an indictment on our culture and society where children need protection, but it's a fact.
Absolutely. So let's go and find out who Yaron Lischinsky was. So Israel Hayom, who is one of Israel's leading newspapers in Israel, under the heading Slain Israeli Diplomat Yaron Lischinsky was a German Christian who fell in love with the Jewish state. Yaron was a German-born evangelical Christian who embraced Israel as his home, was killed alongside his fiancée in a terrorist attack in Washington D.C. on Wednesday. Of course, we've gone through this before and said this before, but what's new is he said that his unwavering Zionism and dedication to Israel's diplomatic service defined his life. It was cut short by a brutal act of violence. They say that he grew up in Nuremberg in Germany, of course famous for the Nuremberg laws that penalised the Jewish people under Nazi rule, forcing them out of so many professions and forcing Jewish people to wear the yellow star of David. We also see, for example, that he was a messianic before moving to Israel and was driven by Zionist ideals. Zineb, who is a Moroccan researcher based in the US, who has maintained a close friendship with Lischinsky, shared her grief on social media, writing, Yaron Lischinsky was a finest friend I've ever had. Brilliant, kind, endlessly thoughtful, a devout Christian, and a gifted linguist. He spoke German, Hebrew, and Japanese. He was full of curiosity and always brimming with ideas. I don't think we ever had a conversation that didn't leave me inspired to write something new. He loved America. He was excited about the future and about finally visiting Texas and about the life he and his beloved fiancée were building together. I was supposed to meet her today. They are both gone and the loss is immeasurable. The world has lost 2 extraordinary souls, and I've lost a dear friend who made every moment brighter. I mean, I'm reading a lot more of these incredible testimonies when it comes to Yaron, that he was dearly loved. I've had messages on my WhatsApp from people that know him and have posted extraordinary conversations and friendships they had with him. So he's left a huge hole, I think, in the Messianic Jewish community in Israel, to be in that position, to serve in the IDF and to be a bright, shining star in Israel's diplomatic service, where he's dedicated his life, like we have, to the defense of the one and only Jewish state, has to be applauded. And it was a shame that his life has been cut so tragically short.
Absolutely, and just the amount of testimonies, like you said, of his passion for Zionism, rooted in this belief that we have that God has brought his people home, he's protecting his people are a blessing to the world, to the nations. Yaron was extraordinary. He's also gifted with huge intelligence. It was Tom Ziv, former director of the Argument Institute and doctoral candidate at the Hebrew University, said this. He said, during the final class, I mentioned my doctoral dissertation about Israel's support methods in the evangelical world, and afterwards he revealed to me that he was an evangelical Christian, wanting to discuss it further, and Ziv portrayed him as charming, kind-hearted, quiet and modest, yet filled with passion and a genuine desire to create change. And he said, if I've got to describe him in one word, it would be Zionist. And that's something actually in our heart, isn't it? And it's something that Yaron just lived and breathed. And what a huge loss, like you said.
So Ziv also says that we're talking about someone from Germany who identified as a Christian, yet chose to come to Israel and serve in the military. He didn't merely come to complete his service and leave. He generally wanted to build his life here. They relocated here. I'm not certain where they reside now, but they're living in Israel at the time. He goes on to say that he was truly committed to serving the state of Israel, choosing diplomacy as his vehicle for contribution, Ziv explained. Ziv went on to say that diplomacy offered him the greatest opportunity to create meaningful change, leveraging his multilingual abilities, dual citizenship, and what you might call his international perspective on defending Israel and enhance our global position and standing. He also said that he was an exceptional student, quiet, modest, always with a smile, a true role model. And finally, he said in the last conversation he had with him, Ziv said the following. During our last talk, he mentioned wanting to remain in Washington, D.C. a bit longer, eventually to return to Israel. He envisioned his future here. In that final conversation, I asked him directly whether he saw his future in diplomacy, and he confirmed that he did.
Yeah, he's, I mean, he really was a remarkable young man, actually, with a huge future ahead of him, which is so sad. The ICEJ, we mentioned his links to the Messianic world, the Christian world, his passion for Zionism, and actually ICEJ, the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, Dr. Jürgen Bühler, had this to say. The leadership and global family of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem have all been shocked and grieved at the brutal murder of Yaron Lischinsky, 30, and Sarah Milgrim, 26. Outside the AGC event at the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday evening. This was a cruel, detestable act of fanatical hatred bred by the rampant wave of anti-Semitism currently manifesting against Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. We condemn the premeditated killing of these two Israeli embassy staff members, as well as the reckless incitement against the Jewish state and people which fueled it, including the many irresponsible statements against Israel emanating from world leaders. We also mourn with our Jewish friends in the loss of Yaron and Sarah. I and my family personally knew Yaron well as a member of our congregation in Jerusalem, and like my family, he moved to Israel from Germany out of a deep conviction that he belonged in this nation. Several of our Jerusalem staff also knew Yaron and his family and were all broken-hearted for the Lischinsky family and the Milgrim family as well. May they be comforted and consoled in Zion. Isaiah 61, verses 2-3. I fondly remember Yaron as an outstanding, articulate young man with a promising diplomatic career ahead of him. He attended a number of Christian embassy events as part of the official delegations from the Israeli embassy in Washington. His death is a loss for the whole nation of Israel, and it's made all the more sad and painful coming right before the joy of his engagement to Sarah. The tragic loss of Yaron and Sarah is a clarion call for Christians everywhere to stand up as never before against the anti-Semitic incitement now permeating our global discourse. That's from Dr. Jürgen Bühler, president of the ICEJ. And that clarion call to stand against anti-Semitism, something we believe in so passionately right at this time, and as well, and again, condemning those world leaders such as our own who recently condemned Israel.
Yeah, I don't think people are fully aware of the responsibilities or what happens when the media, or politicians, social media, trade unionists and others decide to attack Israel. And after all Israel is doing is defending itself from the biggest mass terrorist attack that's ever occurred on Israeli soil in recent modern history, certainly since the re-establishment of the modern state of Israel in 1948, and how Israel's deterrent capabilities were shot to bits then. But it wasn't only that, was the sheer brutality. Hamas did not target military targets. They committed rape, they committed acts of genocide, mutilation and torture, and then taking over 251 hostages back to that hellhole in Gaza. And the treatment of the hostages is absolutely horrific. And yet the world has moved on from the horrors of October the 7th. It didn't take them long. And now every kind of news report doesn't put October the 7th in its context to what's happening in Gaza. Yes, it's tragic what's happening in Gaza. It's tragic for the people of Gaza. But who is to blame? Hamas. It's a totalitarian terrorist organization that do not care one iota for their own people, but instead use their own people, particularly women and children and elderly and the vulnerable, as human shields. And there's even reports coming out of where residents of Gaza have been running to get aid packages, only to be met with Hamas terrorists who are shooting in the foot and in the legs so that they can't pick up the aid packages because they want to make money out of it and look after themselves. So the whole lies surrounding Israel's military offensive against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Yeah, I mean, if this was the Second World War and we were fighting against the Nazis, and this ideology of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad is that infusion of Nazism and that infusion of Islamism, which has made that deadly combination. And that is what Israel's fighting against. And how our Western leaders are so foolish. They lack insight and they lack understanding that what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. And rightly so, that we should defend and stand up to the only democracy in the Middle East, which is the nation of Israel. And we've also seen, for example, that the United States under President Trump has gone cold against Israel, and J.D. Vance, the vice president, cancelled a trip that he was due to make to Jerusalem to show solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people. So, and again, when the world's biggest superpower and this administration in Washington D.C. do not support Israel publicly by visiting Israel, even though they met with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and the Qataris, sends a dangerous message to Israel's enemies.
Absolutely. And in fact, visiting the region and making deals as well behind Israel's back, for example, with the Houthis, that making a deal with the Houthis to stop bombing the Americans that doesn't include not bombing Israel, making a deal with Hamas for the American hostage, unilaterally without Israel, and again not for the other hostages. I think this is scary times. I think if you're Israeli, if you're Jewish actually around the world. What always surprises me as well, Simon, is the amount of world leaders. I mean, you expect it to somewhat in the media, and we're used to their almost anti-Israel bias and slant, particularly some sections. But what surprises me with world leaders, such as the statement made recently by Starmer, Macron and Carney, is not even mentioning the hostages. This is a friend, like you say, the only diplomacy in the Middle East where you can be Christian, where you can be whatever you want to be in a safe, it's the most free and democratic, and the only democratic place in the Middle East, our friend who was attacked, this pogrom, this murder, this massacre, and we, within a short time, are putting pressure on them. It's unheard of. And this is at the time when Yemeni children are starving, when there's multiple murder in places like Syria, and so many places around the world that don't even get a mention or an honourable mention. It's just this obsession with Israel, and it's this rise of this anti-Semitism. I always say it's that dragons, that satanic spirit of Revelation 12. Just the enemy hates God's people. And to see what's going on with America, and actually it's interesting, so many people were like, oh, this is going to be amazing for Israel. You know, Trump is like the Mashiach, somebody said. I said, no. America first means America first, you know, at the expense of Israel, I think, at some times.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've articulated that very, very well. So let's unpack who this left-wing terrorist actually was, who committed this brutal and evil and callous murder last Wednesday against this beautiful young Jewish couple. So the Daily Telegraph reported on Friday the 23rd of May under the headline, "Suspected Washington gunman is a BLM," stands for Black Lives Matter protester who was infatuated with support for Hamas. Elias Rodriguez, who allegedly killed 2 Israeli embassy workers, made social media posts appearing to show his thirst for violence. The terrorist suspect, accused of killing 2 Israeli embassy staff, flaunted his support for Hamas online and attended Black Lives Matter's protest. So Elias Rodriguez, 30, was arrested, allegedly shooting Israeli embassy staff members, Yaron and Sarah, as they left the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. It says there, on Thursday, Mr. Rodriguez was charged with 2 accounts of first-degree murder. He was also charged with murder of foreign officials, causing death with a firearm, and discharging a firearm in a crime of violence. According to the FBI, Mr. Rodriguez was captured on security cameras shortly after 9 p.m. on Wednesday, walking past the 2 victims before turning around and shooting at them while their backs were turned. When they collapsed to the ground, he said to have leant over them and continued to fire. Mr. Rodriguez seemingly reloaded his gun as Miss Milgrim attempted to crawl away and sat up before shooting at her several times and jogging away. Mr. Rodriguez then entered the museum and was detained by security staff as witnesses rushed to help the victims, the police said. Footage of his arrest shows him chanting "Free, Free Palestine" as he was taken away by an officer. Social media posts, which appear to have been made by the alleged gunman, have revealed the extent of his obsession with the terror organisation Hamas and his thirst for violence. On New Year's Day, his account, believed to have belonged to Mr. Rodriguez, posted, "Happy New Year, death to Israel." In another alarming message published a week after the assassination attempt of Donald Trump last July, Mr. Rodriguez shared an image that read, "I agree with the public opinion that says kill him."
Yeah, I mean, it's, you can see the hate and the murder, and that murderous hate, you can see it in his posts, and you can see it in obviously in his actions. But interestingly, there was this whipping up, this claim of 14,000 babies starving. But you can see this kind of like far left agenda, this almost supporting Donald Trump's death. Another post suggested he supported the bombing of the New York Times newsroom. Progressive tweets, he said, "As much as I love delving into the day's discourse, can we please save the idealistic and high-minded debate over the morality of sending a truck bomb into the offices of the New York Times until after we send a truck bomb into the office?" Horrific, violent post. And the FBI said it was investigating social media posts made by Rodriguez. "Make no mistake, this attack was targeted anti-Semitic violence and it won't be tolerated." That's a quote from Stephen Jensen, Assistant Director in charge of the Washington Field Office of the FBI. He also said, "We're executing search warrants for his electronic devices, reviewing his social media accounts and all of his internet postings. Regarding some internet postings, we're aware of some writings that are purported to have been authored by this subject. We're actively investigating to determine both the authorship and the attribution of these writings, if they belong to his subject or not." From Chicago, The suspected gunman was once linked to the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a far-left group that regularly posts anti-Israel rhetoric on social media and spearheaded Black Lives Matter protests. In fact, there were stickers in New York by this group saying "Execute Zionists." So that's who they are. Mr. Rodriguez participated in a 2017 Black Lives Matter protest outside the home of the mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, according to a now deleted article on the group's Liberation news outlet seen by the New York Post.
And Tim, clearly it shows that Rodriguez is being heavily influenced by Black Lives Matter from the far left Marxist ideology. His heart then becomes full of hate as we see that the hard left is targeting Israel. And of course, we know about that Red-Green alliance, that far left Islamist alliance, which is such a powerful political force today, that it's hard. The only thing that unifies these two very distinct ideologies is the hatred for Israel and the hatred for the Jewish people. And now we've seen that this is a left-wing terror attack on Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah, and you know, many of us were talking about and warning about the BLM movement, this far-left Marxist movement, and actually, I think it was actually so heartbreaking for the Jewish people who actually stood with the black community, not just in Martin Luther King Jr.'s. I think in the Freedom March, over 50% were Jewish. You know, they really supported the black community, and they supported BLM at first, but BLM, you suddenly see their agenda, this Marxist agenda, obsessive with Israel, with you know, anti-authoritarian, this agenda that everything is an enemy if it's you know, you've got the victim and the oppressor, and everything's the oppressor. You see that whipping up, and he's deeply entrenched in that, Rodriguez, and you know, with the hate he expressed and spewed online. It's easy to see a lot of people are being what's the word when you're being radicalized, they're being brainwashed, they're being raised on this hate from a young age.
Absolutely, and it's also important to know that where we see the clenched fist like that, standing like that, that is a Marxist far left, and we see that with the BLM marches, and we also see that with the pro-Palestinian marches as well, with the hard left in association and in partnership with the Islamists. Now, the Daily Telegraph reported on Friday, the 23rd of May, under the following headline: Starmer is siding with Hamas, says Netanyahu. This Prime Minister says Western leaders are on the wrong side of humanity. So let's listen and hear the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking with his own words.
Last night in Washington, something horrific happened. A brutal terrorist shot in cold blood a young, beautiful couple, Yaron Lischinsky and Sarah Milgrim. Yaron had just bought an engagement ring for Sarah. He was planning to give it to her in Jerusalem next week. They were planning to start a new and happy life together. Well, that tragically did not happen. Yaron and Sarah weren't the victims of a random crime. The terrorist who cruelly gunned them down did so for one reason and one reason alone. He wanted to kill Jews. And as he was taken away, he chanted, "Free Palestine." This is exactly the same chant we heard on October 7th. On that day, thousands of terrorists stormed into Israel from Gaza. They beheaded men, they raped women, they burned babies alive. They butchered 1,200 innocent people and took 251 innocent people hostage to the dungeons of Gaza. A short time afterwards, Chancellor Scholz of Germany visited Israel. And after he saw the horrors, he said to me, "These Hamas terrorists are exactly like the Nazis." He was right. And if they could get away with it, these Hamas terrorists would have slaughtered every last Jew on earth. For these neo-Nazis, Free Palestine is just today's version of Heil Hitler. They don't want a Palestinian state. They want to destroy the Jewish state. They want to annihilate the Jewish people who've been in the land of Israel for 3,500 years. I could never understand how this simple truth evades the leaders of France, Britain, Canada, and others. They're now proposing to establish a Palestinian state and reward these murderers with the ultimate prize. Well, for 18 years, we had a de facto Palestinian state. It's called Gaza. And what did we get? Peace? No. We got the most savage slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. You won't be surprised to learn that Hamas thanked President Macron and Prime Ministers Starmer and Carney for demanding that Israel end its war in Gaza immediately. Hamas was right to thank them, because by issuing their demand, replete with a threat of sanctions against Israel, not Hamas, these three leaders effectively said they want Hamas to remain in power. They want Israel to stand down and accept that Hamas's army of mass murderers will survive, rebuild, and repeat the October 7th massacre again and again and again, because that's what Hamas has vowed to do. I say to President Macron, Prime Minister Carney, and Prime Minister Starmer, when mass murderers, rapists, baby killers, and kidnappers thank you, you're on the wrong side of justice. You're on the wrong side of humanity. And you're on the wrong side of history. Now, these leaders may think that they're advancing peace. They're not. They're emboldening Hamas to continue fighting forever. And they give them hope to establish a second Palestinian state, from which Hamas will again seek to destroy the Jewish state. And mind you, it's not going to be a state free of Hamas. When you establish a Palestinian state, we've seen it. The radicals take over. Iran sends them in and they take over. So don't give us this talk. It'll be a peaceful Palestinian state. It won't be. But the hypocrisy doesn't stop there. These and other leaders have bought into Hamas's propaganda that says Israel is starving Palestinian children. And not only is Hamas putting out this lie, a few days ago, a top UN official said that 14,000 Palestinian babies would die in 48 hours. You see, many international institutions are complicit in spreading this lie. The press repeats it, the mob believed it, and a young couple is then brutally gunned down in Washington. So here are the facts. Since October 7th, Israel has sent 92,000 aid trucks into Gaza. That's right, 92,000 aid trucks. That includes 1.8 million tons of aid. 1.8 million tons of aid. More than enough food to feed everyone in Gaza. Yet as we had let the aid come in, Hamas stole it. They took a huge chunk for themselves. The rest they sold at exorbitant prices to the Palestinian population. And then they used the money they stole to recruit new terrorists to continue their war against Israel. Our goal from the start was to get food to Palestinian civilians, not to Palestinian terrorists. So we consulted with our American allies. What do we do to prevent Hamas from looting the aid? Well, together we devised a mechanism to achieve this goal. American companies will distribute the food directly to Palestinian families. They'll do so in safe zones secured by our military. And this will allow us to complete our goal of destroying Hamas while enabling aid to reach the civilian population. We'll complete the construction of the first distribution zones in the coming days. Ultimately, we intend to have large safe zones in the south of Gaza, and the Palestinian population will move there for their own safety while we conduct combat in other zones and receive humanitarian aid there without Hamas interference. In the meantime, we authorized letting trucks enter Gaza to provide for immediate needs. Yesterday, I think more than 100 trucks went in. More will come in today. I tell you this, no army in the world has ever gone to such lengths to provide aid to the civilian population in the midst of intense combat. And Hamas, of course, opposes this. It shoots Palestinian civilians who want to leave for safe zones, and it shoots Palestinian civilians who want to prevent Hamas terrorists from looting the aid trucks intended for them. As for the hostages, we'll do every effort to secure them. I'm ready for a temporary ceasefire to get more out, but we demand, and you should demand, that all of our hostages be released, and released immediately. And so should every civilized country demand this. We're in an intense seven-front war that was launched against us by Iran and its proxies. Sometimes in war, accidents happen. One such incident happened the other day in Jenin, and thankfully no one was hurt. Our military has expressed its regret over the event because we don't target civilians or diplomats. We target terrorists. Exactly the opposite of Hamas. They target civilians, ours, and they hide behind civilians, theirs. They use them as human shields. That's a double war crime. But I don't hear that coming from any one of those countries that criticize Israel. For those who say that Israel stands alone, I say we're not alone. Justice stands with us. The truth stands with us. History stands with us. And so do countless people around the world who can tell the difference between right and wrong, between good and evil. I want to thank all of them. And I especially want to thank President Trump and the American people for their forthright stand with Israel and with the Jewish people. Together we stand, together we'll triumph, and we'll see the victory of civilization over barbarism.
Thank you, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for your moral clarity and calling out world leaders who don't understand Israel's predicament and knowing that their policies have a direct impact on emboldening the enemies of Israel. And understand this, that the enemies of Israel are our enemies. These people are not our friends. They want our destruction. They want the destruction of our values and our way of life. They're against Israel and they're against us. Tim, I just want to quote something because obviously this has direct reference to our Prime Minister directly and to British foreign policy. This is what he said. Obviously we saw it in that excellent piece he did to camera, but he also said this one. I say to President Macron, Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Starmer, when mass murders, rapists, baby killers and kidnappers thank you, you're on the wrong side of justice. You are on the wrong side of humanity and you're on the wrong side of history. And of course, Starmer hasn't taken that very well. So share with us your thoughts on what Netanyahu's just said.
Yeah, history has a way of highlighting truth and righteousness. A lot of people in Nazi Germany would have felt, justified what they were doing. They would have believed this and perpetuated this lie that the Jews are threatening, Germany. They're threatening our sovereignty. They made us lose World War I. And at the time, you're caught up and swept up in this hate. But actually, history will show. Actually, very sad for me, for us, those of us that have been praying for our nation, for our leader to join this, to condemn Israel like that without mentioning the hostages. So many of us said at the time, well, if Hamas pats you on the back, you know you're on the wrong side, and that's what the Prime Minister said.
I've also got a quote here from Amichai Lischinsky, the Israeli Diaspora Minister, who said the following. Irresponsible leaders in the West who give backing to hatred against Jews and Israelis, whether through appeasement, double standards or silence, embolden the forces of terror through their failure to draw moral red lines. This cowardice has a price, and that price is paid in Jewish blood. So we see that Starmer says he thoroughly condemns the anti-Semitic attack outside the Israeli embassy in Washington D.C. And also the government has spoken out about this, but we have to acknowledge that our government's position of taking an increasingly hostile position against Israel is fueling Jew hatred and is empowering and emboldening the enemies of Israel. So in summing up, share with us the dedication and really the huge loss for the Messianic Jewish community with the brutal murder of Yaron and Sarah.
Yeah, we feel a connection to those guys, even those of us that haven't met them. Yaron's passion for Zionism is something we share. He's an evangelical Christian, he's described as. He loves the Lord, he believes in the scriptures like we do, believes in God's promises for Israel. Now we know that Yaron is with Jesus, and we know Sarah, she's with the Lord, these Messianic couple. And it's something that deeply impacts us, even though we never met. They're like, we share their passion for Zionism and their life dedicated to advocating for Israel, for advocating for peace and advocating for Zion. And in that scripture, in Isaiah, which we've heard from yourself, also from Dr. Jürgen, it says, we don't give ourselves rest until Zion is established.
Amen, amen. And also have to deal with the fact that where we see incitement and hatred against Israel, this is where it takes us. The killing of innocent Jewish people. And what we see is that people like this murderer have become radicalized through hatred. And in this case, it wasn't an Islamist attack, but it was an attack carried out by someone who's been influenced by hard left political ideas. And this is, I think, the different equation in all of this, that now Israel has to worry about potential terror threats coming from the radical left.
Absolutely, and the responsibility of media, of world leaders, this boiling point that was reached after, I think it was Tom Fletcher at the UN claimed that 14,000 babies were going to starve. It results in blood on the streets. They have to be more responsible, they have to recognise that, and given a quote after, "We're very sad about this," isn't enough.
No, absolutely. But also I think we have to learn the lesson of history, and sadly this is the lesson of the Holocaust, that what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. What that means is that this evil demonic ideology first comes after the Jewish people, then it comes after the rest of us. So we need to speak up and stand up. Tim, you've done an excellent job today on Behind Headlines. Absolute pleasure working with you, and in Hebrew, kol hakavod, for a job well done. And thank you for the bold and courageous stance that you and your wife, Haley, are making for Israel and the Jewish people. And I just want to thank you for watching this program at home. Our heart breaks for the family of this beautiful Jewish couple who were about to get married, about to have a new life in Israel, who were diplomats who advocated the cause of Israel in the world stage, in the arena of diplomacy. We need to keep their families and their friends in prayer and continue to stand with Israel. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.